Thank you for joining us today on Sci Fi Journal, Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley.
Yes, indeed. Glad to be here.
You're going to the Malta Star Trek Symposium 50th anniversary. How'd you end up doing that? And can you just tell us a bit about yourself for people that don't know you?
Well, I am a U.S. diplomat and had the pleasure and honor of being assigned as the U.S. ambassador to Malta. And so got involved with the local community, as I do wherever I go, because I've been a Star Trek fan from the original series. As an African American, I found it very inspiring when I was young, and certainly the vision of what our future can be was something I very much embraced. And so, all the different aspects of Star Trek, the very different episodes, one of the things that came out as I was watching and looking at the importance of diversity and inclusion was indeed diversity with regard to abilities. And it dovetailed last year with the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was really important in the United States to talk about defeating discrimination and making appropriate accommodations for those with disabilities. And so started looking at Star Trek episodes with that in mind and seeing how Star Trek dealt with the issue.
Okay. So how does disability fit into the Star Trek universe? It's supposed to be the future, yet I guess you have characters like, Geordie LaForge would be the probably one of the really well-known examples, and he's blind.
Yes. Well, I think that Star Trek actually embraced, maybe as we were moving in the United States with our thinking about disabilities. And so I very much enjoy the phrase differing abilities as opposed to different disabilities. And Geordie and many of the other characters exemplify this absolutely. You could think of Geordie as disabled, but you could also think of him as having different abilities. And certainly one of the episodes that we wrote about in the paper was one where if Geordie had been, genetically aligned and all the differences taken out, a planet would have been destroyed. It was his different ability and the accommodations made to address it that saved the day, as it were.
Okay. So where else do we see disability in the Star Trek universe? How does it make a difference? How do characters end up saving the day, or how does their disability dealt with, and where does that leave people watching the show, I guess, who may be in a similar boat to some degree or another?
Well, I think as with many aspects of Star Trek, it leaves us with a great deal of hope and a different aperture of looking at the world and all the different types of people that are in it. We chose a few different episodes, which I think, again, make the point that there is room and space to welcome and embrace all of us, to allow everyone to fully contribute to what is good about our society. One of the other episodes that we touch on, and I had a very robust discussion with my husband about it last night, when you talk about disabilities and what makes a disability versus a different ability. There was one called Melora, and it wasn't that she was human and therefore she couldn't hear or see or move as other humans do, but in fact she came from a different planet, and there had to be accommodations for her to work on the space station in Deep Space Nine. And so this discussion of what reasonable accommodations are, and the Americans with Disabilities Act talks about reasonable accommodations, and in fact the UN rights of the disabled talk about reasonable accommodation, that ability to let everyone participate to the full extent. So she had to have accommodations, whether a wheelchair or the ability to, get in and out of rooms. And there have been opportunities in Star Trek, whether it's Geordie with the visor or Melora, to make changes to their bodies that would allow them to be to function without the accommodations. And in episodes in the show, both chose not to change their own makeup to fit in with what was expected or would allow them to move about without the accommodations. And so this goes into a discussion that has happened, I think, around the world, certainly in the United States, about whether you make accommodations or whether you change people. And that goes for those who are deaf and whether they would have, I think they're called cochlear implants, or whether to continue with sign language and other accommodations to allow them to participate. So I think Star Trek has contributed to a very robust discussion about how we deal with these, and I believe supports accommodation rather than changing people's physical capabilities in and of themselves. So I think it adds to the discussion and provides hope.
Okay, I guess that's part of the question, isn't it? Is accommodation, or I guess I work as a software engineer in my day job. I've known doing medical devices, and I've known people over the years that have worked for Cochlear, actually sort of designing and building the implants, the cochlear implants for deaf people. I don't know. I guess having seen how that works out for people, if they can get them installed and get them working for people, it makes such a profound difference to their lives. So,
yeah. Well, I think it depends on when it happens. As I said, I know there are those who say, I don't want one. I'm fine as I am. This is how God made me, and I'm ready to go forward this way and work with accommodations. So I think it really is an individual choice, as I think it should be. But those opportunities, and then we get into Star Trek and technology, which again, those opportunities to make those accommodations or those devices for people who want them is again part of that hope and our future about how technology can really be a force for good in that way. But in Melora, she chose not to make the change in order to work in a non-zero gravity atmosphere. She chose not to, and that is important as well. Again, Star Trek, I believe, consistently celebrates the other, the fact that we can find ways of communicating, accommodating, getting along with, working with people who are not exactly like us. And that is so important.
Oh, yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah.
What do you make of, I don't know if you touched on it in the paper or not, but what do you make of the storyline from Deep Space Nine with Julian Bashir, where it turns out his parents had him genetically altered as a child because, I suppose he was intellectually disabled to some degree.
Well, yeah. You know, I watched the episode recently. We didn't deal with it specifically because I don't know if it would be considered a disability. I mean, people have a wide variety of intellectual capabilities. He had difficulties, but is it a disability, or was there a path of life that his parents didn't want for him? So I think that's different, if you see what I mean. To make everyone brilliant isn't to address a disability, it's to give them.
Well, that's true.
Yeah. So I didn't consider where he came from a place of disability. So we didn't deal with that.
I thought it was interesting because it was done to him as a child. And I know just from knowing people in the industry, cochlear implants need to be installed very young.
Mm-hmm.
They need to be installed in kids or to get the best results with them because of brain development and stuff. If you don't get the implants when you're very young,
right,
you just lose the ability. You just sort of lose the neural wiring to be able to hear.
Okay.
It's like you're saying, should you accommodate them or should you treat the condition with technology? And I guess the parents are the one that have to make the choice for their offspring, because by the time the child's old enough to make an informed choice, that choice will be taken away from them.
Right. Okay, I don't think I realized that. A very
No, that's okay.
Yeah,
I didn't know it till I met people in the industry who were talking about it.
yeah.
Company I'm working for is looking at doing some work with Cochlea, so
Ah,
it sort of all came up.
okay, all right. Well, there was a very, the ER TV show that was very popular in the States. There was a character whose son was born deaf, and there was a major debate between the mother and the father because one wanted it and one didn't. And so that discussion of is he all right as he is, or do we need to do this was very well done, and I think provocative and thought provoking, really.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
certainly worth having it's certainly worth considering it either way because I mean I suppose if you're I have some friends I used to go to church with who do outreach and ministry to the deaf community
Mm.
and learn some sign language from them and used to go to church with a bunch of deaf people as a result. And yeah, it's fascinating to talk to them when they have kids. Do they want them to be deaf too? Do they want them not to be deaf? Would they treat the deaf? It's there's so many questions, and
Exactly.
um, they really argue over this in the community because some of them, like you say, well, no, this is just who we are, and there's nothing wrong with us, and other people say, well, yeah, but well,
Yes. Yeah.
it's a defect on some level. I mean, like the average person that develops normally can hear, so it's a deviation from the norm, and it can be corrected. But whether it's like
And
it's a
you,
hard
right, and
question.
you're mentioning that and the Julian episode, if we had chose to deal with that, because you also might have, there was an episode with Troy and another empath, and the fact that they could hear too much, they were bombarded with everyone's thoughts and feelings, etc., and it made them unable to function. I don't know if you recall those two episodes, but that too, I suppose, could be considered a disability. So do you take away that additional ability because it's too much to deal with?
That's the other side of the coin.
Now, well, as I said, I think the episodes and I hope our paper really make people think because it's still a struggle for disabled people. It's still a struggle. The acceptance, the accommodations, the debate about what's reasonable, what's not reasonable, what's a burden on a business or a school, etc. These are daily trials and tribulations for all concerned that we have to continue to work through. And I believe the Star Trek episodes, as in so many ways, give us a way forward, a way of looking at it and thinking about it in a reasonable, tolerant way that can be very helpful to us today. So I was very excited about taking up the topic and generally very pleased with the way the writers dealt with the issues within the series. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today, Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley.
My pleasure. My pleasure.